Hello, good morning. This is Jessica of Into the Warren, and today I have a different kind of video for you. I have a little project that I want to work on this morning, and I thought I would record some of the process, the steps that it took to achieve what I'm trying to achieve. And that is dyeing some small skeins of yarn for the Mountain Mama Sock project. I have ordered bare yarn and I am eagerly awaiting for it to arrive. But until then, I had purchased some of these Patons Kroy sock yarn balls, and I was gonna mix them with my hand-dyed yarn, but the thickness of this yarn and the texture of this yarn and then the yarn that I dye is very different. This is much thicker and much, I don't know, it's just a little bit rougher, I guess. And when I mix them, it's very strange. So instead of doing that, I have some of the of this yarn in white, and I'm going to dye these two balls of yarn so that I can use all three for the Mountain Mama Sock project. The Mountain Mama Sock pattern is by Emma Jane Knits. And you can search her on Instagram or in Ravelry and see the Mountain Mama sock. So basically it is a sock that has some color work in it, and it has this, it's like the sky and then a mountain range, and then it's a solid bottom. What I want to do is the bottom of the sock I want to have gray, and then these two colors will be the sky and the mountain. So one, I am going to do like a light pink. Maybe it'll be white with speckles. I'm still thinking about it in my mind, but by the time I come back, I will have a decision. And then this one, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna make like a gray blue for the mountain part. I think a gray blue would be really pretty. So that is what I am thinking about. So step one, and this is a great way for you to, like, if you've never dyed yarn before, maybe this will help you learn a little bit about it. You have to have, if you're going to use acid dyes or Kool-Aid or food coloring, you need to make sure that the yarn that you use is made out of a protein fiber. So it has to be like a wool or a silk. If you want to dye like cotton or something, you'd have to use a different kind of dye. I can dye this yarn because it is 75% wool and 25% nylon, so the wool will allow me to do that. Now, these little balls of yarn are really expensive, so if you want to dye yarn, it's probably best to just buy nice bare yarn instead of buying these little things. I think one of these was like $5.99 or something, and it's only a 50-gram ball, and I think for like $5.99 you could get a 100-gram hank. But because I already bought this for the project, I don't want them to just lie around the house. I'd rather use them, so we're gonna do that. But again, you can't just go and dye acrylic or whatever with dyes, commercial or food grade or whatever. So make sure that if you are going to dye yarn that you have a protein fiber. And so step one is I'm going to take this ball and I'm going to wind it on my niddy noddy. A niddy noddy is how you make the hanks of yarn that you see a lot of indie dyers set up, you know, hand dyed yarn is on hanks usually. And this one my husband made. It's just made out of PVC pipe. If you want to make one, you can check out Chemknits tutorials. Like just search making a niddy noddy and Chemknits. I'll try to link the video below, and it gives you the directions on what to do and then how to use it. But it's really easy. And so, and I have different, this pulls apart and I have different lengths for the center depending on how big I want the hank to be. So I will be right back. I'm gonna wind the first hank onto the niddy noddy and make it into a hank. Okay, I have put the first skein on the niddy noddy, so it looks like this. And again, if you want to learn how to use a niddy noddy, just check out some tutorials on YouTube. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to tie like a figure-8 tie in 2 or more places on your yarn so that when you pull it off the niddy noddy, it doesn't get all tangled. And I'm gonna take this off the niddy noddy. So let me do that real quick. I'm just gonna slide it off. I have a taped end so it doesn't rub up against the PVC pipe. So I'm just peeling it off, and it's like magic. I'm gonna take the tied end, hold it by the tied end, and voila, now you have a skein, a hank, of your yarn. And I'm gonna leave it like this. So you're gonna wanna leave it like this to dye. And then once it's dyed and dry and all that kind of stuff, then that's when you wind it up and put it in a fancy old hank. So I'm gonna do this with the other one, and then we're going to get to the soaking part of, actually I don't think I'm gonna soak this time. I think I'm gonna dip it dry. So let me get the other hank ready and then I will show you what to do next. Okay, now I have both skeins ready, and as an additional measure, it's really a good idea to take a thicker, different colored yarn, or you can also use cable ties to tie the yarn again, just because when you're dyeing and washing and all that kind of stuff, it can get tangled really easily and it's a big headache. So I just take some of this green acrylic yarn and wrap it again around, not tightly, because if you do it too tight, then you're gonna have some like white areas of resistance because it's, you know, this is blocking the dye from entering into the yarn. I tie it in like at least two places to keep the loop of the hank. And forgive my band-aid, I had a fight with the rotary cutter yesterday when I was making project bags. Like I just barely grazed my thumb, the blade, and it cut me really good. So obviously it's a very sharp blade. So anyway, I have this one done, and I'm gonna cut 2 more pieces for the other hank. So I'm just gonna find where I tied it. Let's do this side first. Because you see these ties are the same color and they're not very thick. So, and I just tie it in like a regular everyday knot. So I'm gonna take these 2, set them aside, and I'm gonna go get the pot ready and show you what to do for the dyeing process. Okay, in order for your dyes to actually dye yarn, there are some things that you need to have. The first thing is you have to have water, and it has to be heated. And the second thing is you need to have some sort of acid. It can be citric acid or it can be vinegar. I use vinegar. Not everyone does because vinegar is a little smelly, but let me grab my vinegar. You need to have vinegar. Vinegar is what actually makes it set the dye in the wool. You also have, the third thing is you have to have some sort of pot or pan in order to dye your wool. And I use commercial dyes, meaning they're not food safe. So anything that I use with commercial dyes, I never use as anything with cooking after that. So this pot is solely for making and dyeing yarn. So keep that in mind. If you're using food coloring or Kool-Aid, you can use any pots and pans that you have in your house and still use them for food because they are food safe. And if you're like, I don't want to waste my good pots and pans dyeing, but I want to dye some yarn, my suggestion is go to the thrift store. And Cinnamon Stitches, another podcaster, had this idea. I don't even know why I didn't think of it, but you can go to the thrift store and buy some old pots and pans there. So here we go. I am going to dye one skein at a time because they're 2 different colors. So I only put 4 cups of water in this pot because it's not a lot of yarn. And I'm going to turn it on to like medium high just to start getting it warmed up. And I want the background color, the sky color of this mountain sock, to be a very light pink. And so I'm going to use my commercial dye Flamingo Pink from Dharma Trading Company. This is a very it's not a very bright pink at all. It's very like a naturally soft pink. And I am going to get my measuring cup just to have usually when I actually dye yarn for the shop and I have a real recipe that I'm going to repeat, I write down everything that I'm doing so that I can repeat it the best I can in another batch. But I don't know if I'll ever make this again, so I'm still going to measure it just for the sake of measuring. So this is my dedicated dye measuring cup, and it's only one little thing of wool. So I'm going to do like 1/8 of a cup. I'll do 1/4 cup, why not? So I'm going to take my dye and I'm just going to pour it in the pot. And I'm going to close this up. It's a good idea if you're using commercial dye to like move stuff out of the way, so it's not like touching your food or anything. Let me get my spoon. So this spoon is specific for dyeing, and I'm just going to mix this. So it's a very, very light pink right now. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to put the skein in dry. Sometimes, in some cases, you're going to want to soak your yarn with vinegar before putting it in. But I don't mind if my, ooh, yarn everywhere. I don't mind if this yarn has light and dark, you know, that tonal quality. So let me think, am I going to put vinegar in first? I'll put a little bit of vinegar in first. Let's do a splash. Okay, I'm going to mix it up. The more vinegar that you put in your dye bath, the faster it's going to strike your yarn. So you don't want a ton, because then you might just have one spot with a lot of color and then nowhere else. I'm just going to push it down. It's going to take time for it to soak in here. Maybe I do need more water. Yarn dyeing is all about troubleshooting and testing and figuring out what works. Ooh, I definitely need more water. Let me grab another cup of water. Okay. Let's see if I can push this down a little more. So I'm really just pushing it down so that the water starts to absorb in the wool. And it's not a very bright pink at all, as you can see. Now if I find like it's striking too fast and not everything got pink, because what will happen is the water will clear once you have exhausted all of the dye. I think this is a pretty color. I want it to be contrasting to the dark blue that I'm going to use for the mountain. So I'm going to let this sit for probably 10 minutes and then check and see if it almost looks clear already. And just let it simmer for a minute and make sure the water is clear, and then I'll take it out and we'll do the next batch. Okay, so I let this simmer for a few minutes, and there is no color left in the water. If there was still color left in the water, I would say let it, I'm going to turn this down a little bit, let it rest in there with the heat for a while, and if it still didn't have, or if it still had color, then that would be the time where you would add more vinegar. So I'm going to pull this out and just put it in this steam pan, because I think I'm going to add a few speckles to it. And there's a little piece of yarn in here, so let me pull that out. Okay, so now we're going to do the second color. And the vinegar is already in here from the first batch, so you don't have to add any more vinegar. I'm going to add this steel blue color, which is like a grayish blue, and the concentration's a little bit higher, and I'm going to put 1/4 cup just like before, but I'm thinking it's going to be a lot darker, which is what I want, because I want the pink and the steel blue to be contrasting colors. So got that in there. Now this may strike really, really fast because it's already hot and with vinegar. So I'm going to try to put it in there all at one time and push it down as quickly as possible so that it strikes all parts. And here we go. Now it might have been a better idea to soak the yarn first so there was a more even strike, but again, I really like the tonal qualities of hand-dyed yarn. I like how some parts are lighter than others. So you can see, obviously, this is much darker. And I'm just pushing it down And this one might take a little more time. So just pushing it down, letting it rest in this blue dye. This one I'm not going to speckle because I think it's going to be too dark anyway. But I'm going to let this be the solid, and then I'm going to speckle the pink. So let me get ready for the pink speckling and I'll be right back. Okay, I might sound a little bit muffled because I am going to be using the powder form of a commercial dye. And when you're using powder, you need to make sure that you're covering your nose and your mouth because there are dust particles that will float in the air and you don't want to breathe those in. Those are chemicals. If you're using Kool-Aid or food coloring, you don't have to do this. So I'm going to do a few speckles. Let me put a few bits of vinegar in here just so that the speckles for the most part are going to be sharp, I think. I probably should have done this first. Let me mix this a little bit. And as you can see, I have this skein really spread out because you want to make sure that you're not just getting one part of the yarn. And if I had a lot in this dye bath, I'd want to turn it a few times to make sure that there wasn't bare spots. So let me get my glove on. What I'm going to do is do some amethyst speckling. So amethyst you would think would be more purple, but it's actually, well, it's kind of purplish, but it's mostly like this bright pink to me. But I will show you. And some people use different techniques, but I'm just going to take my hand with a glove and I'm just going to sprinkle. I probably should have turned the heat on, but that's okay. I'm just going to sprinkle it on top. It's probably going to spread a little bit because I didn't turn the heat on because I forgot. And now my glove is covered in dye, so hold on a second. Let me sprinkle a little bit more. This is the sky, so I think it would be cool to have a little bit of this texture. Make sure you get up near where the ties are because it's kind of hidden. So anyway, you get this done. Oops. And then I'm going to close this very carefully. And I like to close it over the water because when this dye particles fall, they tend to go to the wet areas. Let me go wash my hand. And now I'm going to turn the heat on. And as soon as the powder hits water, you can take your mask off. So I'm going to take my mask off. And I'm going to let this heat up for a bit. Few minutes, and once it gets hot and kind of bubbly, I like to cover it with aluminum foil. How did I get dye on this hand that I didn't even use? Once it starts to boil, I'm going to put aluminum foil over it so the steam can help set it, and then do it for like maybe 10 minutes or so, and then move it around and see if there's any dye in the water still. And then the blue, it's hard to see because of all the steam. It looks like the water is getting clearer. It might have been a little too much dye for this little amount of yarn, but I'm going to give it a few more minutes and see what happens. Might have to, I don't even have any bare yarn to use in there, but might be more rinsing involved, but that's okay. We'll give it a few more minutes and I'll be back. Okay, I don't know if you can quite tell, but the water where the steel blue is clear now. And so I let it sit here for a little while, and now I'm going to pull it out. It's still a little warm. Whoops. Pull it out. You can see that I'm not the best videographer, as I've said in the past. I'm going to let it drip for a minute. It's kind of hard to tell on here, but it is more of a navy than it looks kind of black on screen, but I'm going to put it on this plate without making too much of a mess. And there's the first one, and you'll see it better once I wash it and put it outside to dry. I'll let you, got fuzz, I'll let you take a look. And then I know I wanted to have speckles, but when you're dyeing yarn, your expectations need to be more realistic sometimes. Sometimes things don't always look exactly how you wanted them. But, and I did find some yarn, like some wool yarn scrap to just stick in here to soak up any additional color. So this is kind of like a purplish pink, because I soaked up some of the blue. But you can see this is not as speckly as I wanted it. I think one, because I forgot to turn the heat on, and two, because I maybe put a little too much water in here. But that is okay. There are some speckles, and I really do like the color mixture, and it'll still be a really big contrast from, whew, that got really red right there. It'll still be a really big contrast from the navy, so I think it's just going to be fine. So I'm just going to lay it on this plate. Ooh, pretty. I'm going to let it cool off. This is like the little mop. I'm just going to, my timer, good timing. This is just a little mop of yarn. Okay, so one thing you need to know about wool, especially wool that's not superwash wool, that hasn't been treated in some way, is that if you move it around or go from hot to cold really, really fast as far as like water, like these are really hot. If I were to just put it under cold water and start washing it, it could felt, meaning that it starts to lump together and it's not, you're not going to, the fibers start to stick together and you're not able to knit or crochet with them anymore. They get kind of like hard and lumpy. And so you don't want that to happen. So the best course of action, even someone as impatient as I am, is to let it cool off at least a little bit before you try to wash it. And also you want it to cool off because you don't want your fingers to burn, but you can also see why these ties are so important. Why I use them, because it does get kind of mixed up, but you can see the two colors. This is looking a lot brighter than this pink is looking a lot brighter than it really is, but you can tell like the contrast is there for these socks. I'm gonna let this dry, or cool, not dry, but cool off a little bit, and then I'm gonna wash it, and I'll be back. Okay, so I am in my utility room, and this sink is much bigger. So what I've done is I've just put some dish soap in the water. I usually use clear, but I don't have any left, so I'm just using Dawn. I'm just filling this up with cool water, and then I'm going to wash the yarn over and over, making sure nothing, no bleeding comes out or anything like that. Now, some bleeding might happen, but as long as it comes out, it's not that big a deal. So I'm just going to wash it, and then I will hang it up to dry and show you what it looks like hanging up to dry. Alright, so here you go. I have washed the yarn. There was no bleeding, so that was good. You don't want that to happen, at least not too much. If you did have yarn that was bleeding, you might want to soak it in vinegar and then heat it up again for a few minutes just to make sure that you're not going to get bleeding when you're knitting. But here's the pink. It's not at all what I envisioned. It's a lot brighter, but that's okay. It's a more intense sunset. Because I used a little too much water for one little tiny skein of yarn, and I didn't turn the heat on fast enough, but there is speckling and it is still very pretty. And then here is, it's really hard to tell on here, here is, sorry my finger's in the way, the blue, and you can see, once it's dry you'll see it more, but there is different tonal depths of this blue. So there's some lighter blue and darker blue, and it is very, very steel blue. And it's going to be really pretty with these together, and then having the gray on the bottom. I think it'll be gorgeous, and this is just a little yarn mop. Anyway, I'm going to let this dry. It is Florida, so it's like 90 degrees. And the sun's gonna come over here soon, and this will dry in no time, but this is my little blue house. But anyway, it's a beautiful day. Beautiful, beautiful day. Okay, I wanted to add this clip to show you what the yarn looks like all dry and put into hanks. I'm gonna try to put out in the sun, it's so bright. But you can see there's little spots where the yarn is a little bit lighter in this steel blue. Here is the pink. The pink actually is a lot more speckly than I thought it was going to be once it was in the pan, and I really like it a lot. So these are gonna go together. Wish I had not such bright sun, but here is the two of them together to go with the gray to make the Mountain Mama socks.